Midnight news coming to you live from Algiers, and to the headlines. Despite a newly agreed 72-hour ceasefire, gun battles are reportedly continuing in Sudan between the armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces. Coming from Nouakchott, the Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf landed in Bamako on a working visit aimed to reinforce bilateral relations and support peace and stability in Mali. Spanish former Minister for Foreign Affairs Manuel Garcia Margallo criticized Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and stressed that international legitimacy will be achieved in Western Sahara. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov affirmed that his country's clear position against Zionist violations committed in occupied Palestine. Hello again and welcome. Starting from Sudan, where Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan gave initial approval to the Regional African Bloc Intergovernmental Authority on Development's proposal to extend a truce for 72 hours and send an army envoy to Juba for talks. Nabil Khazini.
For 12 days, Sudan has become the center of the world, but in the opposite direction. From all possible channels, everyone rushes to flee a country already sunk into chaos. Several truces were agreed on. The last one is an approval on Wednesday for another 72 hours of ceasefire, agreed by the army, whose leader gave an initial approval to the Regional African Bloc Intergovernmental Authority on Developments to stop fighting again. But despite these steps to stop fighting, still gunfire and explosions could be heard in Khartoum. Clashes between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces renewed in the Sudanese capital, showing no sign of peace and deteriorating more the daily life of people.
At the moment, life is not functioning and general services are really deteriorating. Concerning the daily life, from bread and water to gasoline and benzene, the situation is getting worse day after another. And for the Sudanese citizens living in Khartoum, they are all trying to move their families. They are all trying to move their families amid the deteriorating living conditions.
Shortages of food, water, medicine and fuel have become extremely acute, especially in Khartoum and its outskirts. Everyone wants peace here, including doctors who want the conflict to end, as medical supplies are running low and staff are overworked. The conflict transformed residential areas into war arenas and destroyed hospitals and limited food distribution in a country when 1/3 of the population is already dependent on aid.
The bloodshed we have seen over the past 10 days in Sudan is heartbreaking. In a country whose people have already suffered so much in recent years, already the violence has taken a terrible toll on health.
With the future of any truce uncertain, what matters now for the people in Sudan is to try to get out of the crossfire.
In the same line of thought, the Sudanese Ministry of Health announced on Wednesday that the number of casualties in the clashes between the army and the rapid support forces had risen to 512 since the start of the conflict 13 days ago. The ministry called on both warring parties once again to move away from hospitals and health facilities and not to take them as a central point in order to facilitate the movement of executives, doctors and medical supplies. In Sudan, still, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate end to fighting in Sudan and urged all parties to silence the guns.
The fighting must stop immediately. We need an all-out effort for peace. I call on the parties to the conflict, on Generals Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, Hemeti, and the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to silence the guns.
During a session of the United Nations Security Council to discuss the situation in Sudan, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the protection of the Sudanese people, saying that Sudanese must not pay the heavy price of the conflict.
It is incumbent on Sudanese leaders to put the interests of their people front and center. This conflict will not and must not be resolved on the battlefield with the bodies of Sudan's people.
In related matter, Tuesday night, an evacuation aircraft belonging to the Algerian Air Force landed at Houari Boumediene International Airport, coming from Sudan, with members of the national community, members of the diplomatic mission and their families, as well as Palestinian and Syrian nationals who were evacuated from the conflict-torn country. Miriam.
After an exhausting trip and a long nightmare, the aircraft carrying evacuees from the conflict-torn Sudan landed on Algiers International Airport. Forced to leave Sudan to escape chaos and violence, Algerian nationals and diplomats, as well as Syrians and Palestinians, arrived safe and sound to Algeria, where they were welcomed by high-ranking state officials.
The Algerian authorities have fulfilled their mission as they should, starting from His Excellency the President, who was the first one who followed on the situation, the embassy and the coordination cell.
The crew of the plane and the Algerian army have taken care of evacuating us, and we're so caring that we didn't even feel that we are not living in Algeria. On the contrary, we felt like we are the children of the President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. Mr. President, we are with you.
Algeria didn't miss to mobilize all means to take charge of the evacuees, including Syrians and Palestinians, a move hailed by many and described as noble and human.
There are around 120 registered citizens at the consulate, among whom 81 were evacuated. 60 Algerian nationals were evacuated, as well as 21 from the embassy members and their families. A number of Palestinians and Syrians asked to be evacuated with their Algerian brothers, so we responded to the request for humanitarian reasons and for the sake of Arab solidarity, especially in these hard circumstances.
We had hung the Algerian flag in front of the bus, and when they saw our flag, they let us pass and no one stopped us until we arrived at Port Sudan, thanks God.
Members of the Algerian, Palestinian and Syrian community carried out the evacuation despite clashes, fires, military checkpoints and a long flight, which demonstrates Algeria's commitment and devotion to its Arab principles and Pan-Arabism.
Away from Sudan now, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf was received on Wednesday by the President of the Transitional Legislative Council, Colonel Malik Diaw, as part of his working visit to Bamako, in his capacity as Special Envoy of the President of the Republic for the sake of strengthening bilateral relations and supporting peace and stability in Mali. Mohamed Khatou.
Coming from Nouakchott, the Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf landed in Bamako on a working visit aimed at strengthening bilateral relations and supporting peace and stability in Mali.
The Sahel region is a source of concern for many countries in the region, including Algeria. Therefore, it was natural for me to come here, not only for the security situation, but also for the sake of the strong bilateral relations that unite Algeria with the countries of the region. I was in Mauritania, today I am in Mali, and my next destination will be to Niger with all these friendly countries. I'm here to assess what has been achieved with my colleagues and to see what can be achieved in the future.
The Algerian diplomacy chief held bilateral talks with his Malian counterpart, Abdoulaye Diop, which were later extended to include the delegations of the two countries. The talks centered on prospects of overcoming obstacles that hinder the implementation of the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement stemming from the Algiers process and strengthening cooperation in various fields. For his part, Abdoulaye Diop hailed the relentless efforts made by Algeria under the leadership of President Abdelmadjid Tebboune to back the Republic of Mali at various levels.
Malian Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation Abdoulaye Diop expressed his utmost consideration for the relentless efforts made by Algeria under the leadership of President Abdelmadjid Tebboune to back the Republic of Mali at various levels, especially in this decisive stage of its contemporary history.
Mr. Attaf also met with the president of the Transitional Legislative Council, Colonel Malik Diaw, accompanied by a group of Malian members of parliament. The two men talked about the developments related to the implementation of the agreement and the role of the Joint Operational Staff Committee in confronting terrorist threats and organized crime. The visit of the Algerian diplomacy chief to Bamako reflects the deep-rooted relations between the two neighboring countries and the will of their two leaders to strengthen cooperation in many fields, foremost of which is the security field.
In Africa, still, United Nations Support Mission in Libya said that UN Secretary General Special Representative Abdoulaye Batili is engaging political party leaders, traditional leaders and notables and women and youth group leaders from all the regions of Libya, in addition to the country's top political military leaders, as part of his comprehensive approach to elections in Libya. The tweet by the official account of United Mission Support in Libya comes after another one by Abdoulaye Batili, in which he said the participation and voices of all Libyans in the elections are of paramount importance to the success of the elections. Western Sahara Resources Watch, a non-governmental organization, has called on all companies that have commercial relations with Morocco to immediately cease all purchases and transfers of phosphate from occupied Western Sahara. Hassan Burkan.
In its 10th annual report, the Western Sahara Resources Watch, a non-governmental organization, detailed the companies involved in the looting of phosphate from occupied Western Sahara and urged investors to withdraw from the occupied territories. The world's largest phosphate conveyor belt, located between the occupied city of Bukra and El Ayoun, is where Morocco continues to loot phosphate from the region. The exploitation of global economic conditions has led to Morocco breaking international law to extract and export these resources. Despite a series of international condemnations, Morocco's occupation continues to violate the rights of the Sahrawi people who are fighting for their freedom, independence, and full sovereignty over their natural wealth.
In the year 2022, 23 ships left occupied Western Sahara loaded with 1.23 million tons of phosphate. Mexican imports amounted to 41.6% of the total metal exported from the occupied territories in 2022. Exports to India, Mexico, and New Zealand account for more than 92% of the total mineral trade in occupied Western Sahara. The NGO estimated Morocco's revenues from white gold in Western Sahara at about $655.5 million in 2022.
According to the report, the illegally exploited phosphate mine is one of the main resources of revenue for the Moroccan government in this territory, which it occupies in violation of international law. The report serves as a reminder that the plundering of the wealth of Western Sahara must end, and that all companies and government must act to ensure that the Sahrawi people's natural resources are protected and used for their benefits.
The Algerian Defense Ministry announced on Wednesday the arrest of 20 drug dealers and 13 of attempts to bring 4 quintals of treated weed across the border with Morocco, in addition to a seizure of more than 5,000 hallucinogenic tablets during the last week. In a statement, the ministry stated the army units carried out during the period from the 19th to the 25th of April several operations as part of combating all forms of organized crime and confronting the scourge of drug trafficking in the country. The Moroccan National Labour Union has called for a protest next Monday, corresponding with the International Workers' Day and the slogan of national mobilization to confront the high cost of living.
People will continue demonstrating their fed up in rebut against the high cost of living and the deterioration of the purchasing power of more than 70% of Moroccans. Following a call from the National Labour Union in Morocco, a coalition of left-wing parties, thousands of demonstrators continue their protests, decrying the government through vigils embraced by the largest public squares starting from the 1st of May.
We are announcing the commemoration of May 1, 2023 with a general mobilization. We call on the government to take measures to improve the incomes of Moroccan workers by revising income tax, revaluing wages, and revising the profits of hydrocarbon companies. We are therefore calling for support for vulnerable classes and strengthening control mechanisms to support the purchasing power of citizens.
Demonstrators are facing ignorance of Akhnouch's government to their demands. Their calls denouncing the government and calling it to take practical measures to limit the impact of price hikes have risen, and the poor could no longer afford the exorbitant cost of living.
The anger against the high cost of living is rising to a crescendo in all Moroccan cities. This price increase has redoubled in intensity in recent weeks. Morocco has never experienced this price spike for 30 years. The rise in prices is not only caused by inflation, as the government says. There is also a speculation in the market, the absence of an agricultural strategy and its inability to meet the needs of families. These reasons will justify the demonstrations next Monday.
The escalation of protests came amid a surge in inflation that has put the government under fire from trade unions, the parliamentary opposition, and the local media. This inflation is accentuated by the sharp rise in food prices in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan, during which the level of consumption usually increases.
The Spanish former Minister for Foreign Affairs, José Manuel García Margallo, expressed his view on the issue of Western Sahara, stressing that international legitimacy and democracy will be achieved in Western Sahara in the event of resumption of negotiations between Morocco and Western Sahara in order to reach a lasting and just solution guaranteeing self-determination for the Sahrawi people.
Sanchez urges us to explain our positions towards Western Sahara and Morocco. Mine is simple. It can be summed up in two words: international legality and democracy. When I talk about international legality, I talk about respecting UN resolutions, which urge the two parties to resume negotiations in order to reach a just, lasting and acceptable solution for all, which provides for the right to self-determination of the people of Western Sahara as part of the provisions in line with UN resolutions.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov criticized the failure to implement Security Council resolutions, particularly those relating to Western Sahara cause. At a meeting of United Nations Security Council on Tuesday, Lavrov said that the time had come to implement previous Security Council resolutions, calling on states to explain the failure before the General Assembly.
Not executing previous UN resolutions is a violation of the UN Charter. The Article 25 requires everyone to implement the UN General Assembly resolutions. It's high time for everyone that is ignoring the resolutions to explain why they are doing so. Among these resolutions, the Palestinians, the Syrian Golan, Western Sahara and Kosovo resolutions, as well as Iran nuclear deal and of course Minsk agreement related to Ukraine, and that's something we discussed in details yesterday.
Also, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov affirmed his country's clear position against Zionist violation committed in occupied Palestine. Lavrov, during a meeting with his Palestinian counterpart Riyad al-Maliki on the sidelines of the UN Security Council meeting in New York to discuss the Palestinian cause and the situation in the Middle East, stressed the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, stressing the need to implement Security Council and General Assembly resolutions to resolve the Palestinian issue. He expressed Russia's unwavering position in support of the Palestinian people and developing bilateral relations. The permanent representative of Algeria to United Nations, Nassim Gawawi, reaffirmed Algeria's firm position towards the Palestinian cause and its unwavering support for the right of Palestinian people to establish their independent state with Al-Quds as its capital. During his speech before the UN Security Council on Tuesday, devoted to the situation in the Middle East, the Algerian representative evoked the relentless efforts made by Algeria to close the ranks of the Palestinian factions.
Algeria, under a personal and direct supervision of Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the president of the Algerian Popular Democratic Republic, hosted reconciliation meetings among the Palestinian factions, which culminated in the adoption of the Declaration of Algiers. Algeria also supports the full membership of Palestine in the UN, as the Palestinian Authority enjoys all the elements of a state, and its adhesion to the UN will undoubtedly instill the principle of a two-state solution that is subject to consensus by all parties. Algeria affirms once again its unswerving position and unconditional support for the brotherly Palestinian people until they reach all their inalienable rights, foremost of which is the right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent and sovereign state with Al-Quds as its capital.
In the same line of thought, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, Nassim Gawawi, also expressed during his speech Algeria's strong condemnation of the series of violations of Zionist occupation on Al-Aqsa Mosque and the brutal attack perpetrated against worshippers, calling for the need to put in place mechanisms that provide protection for Palestinian people.
I renew here Algeria's condemnation with the strongest words of the incursions made by the Zionist occupation forces in the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque and the violation against worshippers and retreated faithfuls. I stress that these barbaric and criminal practices constitute a blatant violation against the holy places and against all international laws and charters. This situation puts us more than ever before in front of the need of putting in place the necessary mechanisms to provide protection to Palestinians through the activation of UN Security Council Resolution number 907, which clearly calls for establishing measures to ensure the protection and safety of Palestinian civilians throughout the occupied territories.
Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian denied that Iran provided military assistance to any party in the war in Ukraine. During the meeting in Tehran with UN Deputy Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths, Abdullahian said that Tehran does not consider war a solution and supports national sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, including Ukraine. For the first time since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke to his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky via phone call Wednesday. The Chinese pointed out that the Ukraine crisis is evolving in complex ways with major impacts on the international landscape, adding that his country always stands on the side of peace. For his part, Zelensky welcomed China's importance role in restoring peace and seeking diplomatic solution to the crisis. In China, always, China's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that the greatest threat to peace in Taiwan Strait was the separatist acts of Taiwan independence and the involvement and support of foreign forces. The response came after British Foreign Minister James cleverly warned over the future of Taiwan, saying invading the self-ruled island would destroy trade and distance would offer no protection from the catastrophic blow to the global and Chinese economy.
The current situation is that both sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to the one and the same China. The greatest threat to peace in the Taiwan Strait is the separatist acts of Taiwan independence and the connivance and support of foreign forces. If the UK wants to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, it should strictly abide by the One China principle, firmly oppose Taiwan independence and separatism.
US President Joe Biden and South Korea's Yoon Suk-yeol announced Wednesday the two nations will bolster the response to North Korea's persistent nuclear threat with an agreement that includes plans to transport US nuclear-armed submarines in South Korea for the first time in over 40 years, bolster training between the two countries and improve information sharing between the allies. The new extended nuclear deterrence effort was unveiled as Biden hosted Yoon for a state visit at a moment of heightened anxiety over the increased pace of ballistic missile tests by North Korea.
A nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans our partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action. And it's about strengthening deterrence in response to the DPRK's escalatory behavior and the deal on complete consultation.
To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for being with us in this late hour. Thank you ever so much for always keeping on watch. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform as it is shown in screen. And all I can say at the end, take care, good night.